church stretch from the very beginning to the present day. It was Pearl Buck, the historical novelist, who said that if you want to understand today, you have to search yesterday. And I'm going to tell you a story about this baby, Crystal. The Reverend James is cradling in his hands and is about to baptize. I'm going to tell you his particular story simply because, as Pearl Buck advised, I have searched and I know his yesterdays, and the thread that runs through his yesterdays and intertwines with the yesterdays of this church. The story is by no means unique. It will also be the story, to a greater or lesser extent, of many members of this congregation and the congregations of our sister churches in Grenada. Tristan, his sister, and all the children baptized by Reverend James during the 20 years of his ministry here are the present and the future of this church. What story do we have to tell them, and what legacy will we leave them? So we'll begin the story through the baptismal font, which is in front of Reverend James here. Tristan's mother was also baptized at this font. But between his mother's christening and his christening, this happened. Only the tower of the southern wall of the church remained standing. The eastern wall collapsed into the church, and the font is buried underneath approximately where that man is standing. That font. You can also see to the right a bit of the altar. The pulpit is under there too. It's gone. In due course, members of the congregation dug out the font. It's made of very hard Aberdeen granite, and it survived damage, but repairable, and it is back in use. Tristan's grandfather was also baptized at this font. Amongst other things, he witnessed the revolution and the transition of the Presbyterian Church in Grenada from being part of the Presbytery of the Presbyterian Church in Grenada to an independent church with its own presbytery. Tristan's great-grandmother was also baptized at this point. And amongst other things, she witnessed the end of the era of ministers coming from the Church of Scotland and our union with the Grenada Presbytery. Although nowadays it does not seem to be widely known as an integral part of the Presbyterian Church, she would also witness the opening of MacDonald College. Nowadays not many people seem to associate MacDonald College with this church. It is part of this church and part of this ministry. MacDonald College joined the schools already built by the Presbyterian Church at Celebratory and Bel-Air, which had been built during the previous century in support of the East Indian missions. The font itself was donated to the Kirk in the memory of the infant daughter of a Scottish minister, the Reverend David Silver, who died here. Her name, Loveday Silver, is inscribed on the bowl of the font. Reverend Silver's ministry lasted for 4 years, from 1897 to 1901. I think these are probably the dates I'm going to give you. And I mention the dates because it was during his ministry that a pipe organ was installed. The Grenada Handbook of 1901, the extension of a number of organ recitals at the Kirk. Perhaps you will have some again. this is what the name of the organ after American Night. See some words? It was probably a second-hand organ when we got it, because it is of a type built by Bevington and Sons in London in the 1880s. And Bevington made bespoke small organs, this is a small organ by the way, for churches, and there were many of them installed around the Caribbean, including an Anglican church here in Grenada. It contains over 200 pipes, and we have marveled over the past few months as we have seen it gradually being rebuilt by Mr. Kirk from Barbados. During the 1970s refurbishment, a number of the pipes were replaced with non-Bevington pipes, and in one sense, Ivan may have done us a favour. A few years ago, Greyfriars Church in Scotland and Port of Spain, Trinidad was demolished, but before the demolition, the organ, a Bevington, was carefully dismantled and put into storage at the remaining Church of Scotland in St. Anne's. The Church of Scotland and Trinidad very generously permitted us to select whatever we needed from their Bevington to help with the rebuilding of our organ. The moderator, the Church of Scotland and Trinidad, is here with us today, and I trust that she will convey to her church in Trinidad that their generous gift has been well used, and that many of the pipes of the Greyfriars Church organ are sounding again to the glory of God here. I think I should also commend Richard and Phil Beeman, because it's still a work in progress, but nevertheless they have played it today and they have played it well. To return to our story. Looking back over the years, we've been very fortunate to have one of Grenada's finest musicians and a noted patron of the arts, Richard Strong, as our organist. Prior to Richard, for many years, Mrs. Eunice Steele was our organist. Eunice's daughter Marlon is an active member of her church, and she is there in the choir. Her son Derek, out of sight, up in the control room. Up there in the music floor, working with junior magic with the computers to control our cameras and sound system, and at the same time to broadcast this service on YouTube to the members and friends who cannot be with us in person today. And to them, we say welcome. Now, if we go further back, we'll pick up our story. Tristan's great-great-grandmother was also the organist here. She was the organist for many years. She would tell her children she was playing the organ before her feet could reach the pedals. My father came to Grenada from India and would see who donated the land at Samaritan for the construction of the first church and school there. This was a wedding at the Samaritan church. That photograph was taken about 100 years ago. Next picture. Next slide. This is the Bellevue School. It's something like 400 pupils at the Bellevue School. That is taken around the same time. Why a picture of the Central Tunnel? Because the Central Tunnel is the reason why we are sitting here today in a building which is to the north of the tower, as opposed to the original building which was to the south of the tower. Blasting of the Central Tunnel began approximately 50 years after the church was built, and it was directly underneath the southern end of the church. The colonial government of the day failed to honour their promise to put up retaining walls, and over years there were a series of running battles between the church and the government as successive rock falls on the cliff face brought the edge of the cliff ever closer to the church. the bad luck fall, a visiting Church of Scotland official wrote a strong letter to the government about their continued failure to protect the church building. The governor's response was that the congregation should be glad that the people of the town are no longer throwing their waste over the cliff by the church. And I'm very glad that we have Dr. Mitchell here today, because it was under his administration that it was finally fixed. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. This is what the original church building would have looked like long after its construction. A lot of the subsequent pictures of the church paintings show a red roof. The original roof was actually a slate roof, so that is the original roof. And many of those slates we found in the rubble. The galvanized roof was, red galvanized roof was probably one of the slates of later years. The tower was not in the original plan, but was added before construction was finished, and the tower contains two very important artifacts. The bell, which weighs more than half a ton and was cast by Stephen Miller of Glasgow in 1833. Making of large turret bells was a very fine art, and Stephen Miller was the first one to cast them successfully in Scotland. We know much about him and his history, but that's for another day. The clock. The clock is a birdcage turret clock built by Alexander Mitchell of Glasgow, and it is after the style of a French-built turret clock. And one of Mitchell's clockmakers had been trained in France. It is in working order, but requires a great deal, it was rebuilt after the rain. But it requires a great deal of manual labour to keep it going, so it's effectively been stopped since the beginning of the construction of the new church. It needs some young, strong volunteers to go up there every day. And so, in the beginning, on February 3rd, 1830, a group of Scotsmen agreed that the Presbyterian church should be erected upon a suitable site in St. George's, Grenada. On March 17, 1830, at a meeting of the House of Assembly, it was agreed that the old courthouse lot, where we are now, be granted for the purpose of erecting a church for the Presbyterian form of worship, and that provision be made for the clergyman of the Church of Scotland as soon as he could arrive in the colony. Plans for the Kirk were drawn by Alexander McCombie, proprietor and editor of the Grenada Free Press. And on St. Andrew's Day, November 30th, 1831, the foundation stone was laid with full Islamic honours. On July the 14th, 1833, the church was opened. And this is where we find the link to baby Tristan, who was there in Reverend James's arms. Tristan is a descendant through his great-grandmother of one of the members of the House of Assembly that voted in favour of the old courthouse lot being granted for the construction of the Presbyterian Church. So that thread from the baby back to the members of this church. And as I said earlier, it's a thread that I'm sure links many other members of this church as well. Go back to the very beginnings. So to understand today, yes, we have to search yesterday. But that baby, these children, Reverend James has baptized over the last 20 years.